What if I told you a band outsold Led Zeppelin in Germany, but critics promised failure if they succeeded? They filled Moscow's Olympic Stadium for 10 straight nights, while 300 soldiers with AK-47s surrounded the crowd. A founding member died broke at 38 after being fired at their peak. Their keyboard player wrote a folk ballad that became Bulgaria's freedom anthem. Yet American critics called them worthless. This is the rise and fall of Uriah Heep. London, late 1960s. If you were a working-class kid trying to make it in music, you had two choices: play the blues covers everyone expected, or forge something entirely your own. Mick Box and David Byron chose the harder path. It started in Walthamstow, a working-class neighborhood where 20-year-old Mick Box was splitting his time between soccer and guitar. He'd formed a group called The Stalkers in 1967. But when the original singer left, the drummer suggested his cousin, David Garrick, as a replacement. The audition allegedly happened after a few pints of ale at the local pub. Garrick passed, joined the band, and adopted the stage name that would become legendary: David Byron. The chemistry between Box and Byron was immediate and undeniable. They weren't interested in regurgitating Muddy Waters or copying the blues. They wanted to create something original, something that combined the heaviness of hard rock with vocal harmonies that could soar like an opera. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. By 1969, they committed fully. They formed a new outfit called Spice and started building the pieces. Drummer Alex Napier answered an advertisement in a music paper, famously lying about being single when he was actually married. The band had a strict no marital ties rule. Bassist Paul Newton, formerly of the Gods, completed the lineup. They started playing venues like the Marquee Club, grinding it out night after night, building a following one sweaty performance at a time. But they were still missing something. They needed a sound that was bigger, heavier, more theatrical. Enter Jerry Braun. Braun was a management and production heavyweight who saw raw potential in the band that others overlooked. He signed them to his hit record productions and facilitated a deal with Philips Records. And it was during the recording of their first album at Lansdowne Studios that Braun made a suggestion that would change everything. The year 1970 marked the centennial of Charles Dickens' death, and Dickens was everywhere in British culture. Braun proposed the name Uriah Heep, the sycophantic, manipulative villain from David Copperfield. It was perfect, ironic, memorable, and just dark enough to stand out. But the real transformation came with a sonic decision. Inspired by the organ-drenched heaviness of the American band Vanilla Fudge, they decided they needed a permanent keyboard player. Ken Hensley, a multi-instrumentalist who had played with Paul Newton in the Gods and was then with Toe Fat, was brought into the sessions. Hensley's arrival was the catalyst. He brought mastery of the Hammond organ and mellotron, but more importantly, he brought prolific songwriting that would define their most successful era. The band that had started as a guitar-bass drums trio was now a five-piece force capable of blending progressive complexity with hard rock power. The recording of their debut album, Very Evie, Very Humble, was pure creative innocence mixed with technical trial and error. Mick Box later recalled the band's lack of studio experience. Engineers would place microphones behind cabinets, resulting in a muffled sound that confused musicians who were used to the visceral feedback of live performance. A peculiar historical footnote: while Uriah Heep was rehearsing at the Hanwell Community Center, Deep Purple was in the adjacent room, working on their own seminal material. Two bands that would help define heavy rock, separated by a single wall, creating a cacophony of competing high-volume riffs in the London suburbs. The debut album featured Gypsy, a track that established the Heep trademark, pounding rhythmic guitar riffs married to multi-tracked five-part vocal harmonies. It was ambitious, loud, and unapologetically theatrical.
I want my gypsy queen.
But when the album was released in 1970, the critical response was brutal. While the record fared well in continental Europe, American critics were particularly hostile. Melissa Mills's review for Rolling Stone became legendary. She opened by promising to physically harm herself if the band succeeded. It was vicious, personal, and completely missing the point. The fans didn't care what the critics thought. They heard the power, the ambition, the authenticity. Uriah Heep became what fans would later call a people's group, a band that thrived in spite of the thought police of the music press. The year 1971 was a whirlwind. Uriah Heep released 2 full-length albums, Salisbury and Look at Yourself. This wasn't just prolific, it was relentless. The band was touring nearly 300 days a year, a schedule that forged them into a tight musical unit but began to strain personal relationships. The sound was evolving. They were moving away from the raw heaviness of the debut toward what they called a light and shade approach. Dramatic dynamic shifts that could go from whisper quiet to stadium shaking in seconds. Salisbury, released in early 1971, demonstrated a significant leap in compositional ambition. The title track was a sprawling 16-minute epic featuring a 24-piece orchestra. It was progressive rock at its most grandiose, placing Uriah Heep firmly alongside the genre's pioneers. But here's the irony. While the band was striving for heavy credibility, the album's most enduring contribution was Lady in Black, a simple acoustic-driven folk rock ballad written by Ken Hensley. It became their greatest commercial asset, eventually becoming a massive hit in Germany and selling millions of copies over the ensuing decades. Then came Look at Yourself, later in 1971, and with it, the song that would define them. Look at Yourself was everything Uriah Heep represented in a single track. Ken Hensley's Hammond organ and mellotron swirled around Mick Box's guitar riffs, while David Byron's vocals soared above it all. It was heavy, it was melodic, it was unforgettable. The album went gold in multiple countries. The band was no longer underdogs. They were legitimate contenders in the global hard rock arena. By the early 1970s, Uriah Heep was unstoppable. They weren't just successful, they were a phenomenon. Between 1972 and 1974, they released 3 albums that would cement their legacy forever: Demons and Wizards, The Magician's Birthday, and Sweet Freedom. Demons and Wizards, released in 1972, was the creative peak. The album featured Easy Livin', a track that became their signature song and their biggest hit. Easy Livin' was pure radio gold, infectious, powerful, and impossible to forget. It cracked the top 40 in the United States and became a staple on FM radio. For American listeners discovering hard rock in the early 70s, this song was a revelation. But the album's masterpiece was The Wizard, a 3-minute epic that showcased everything the band could do. Ken Hensley's keyboards created an otherworldly atmosphere, while David Byron delivered one of his most commanding vocal performances. The Magician's Birthday, released later in 1972, continued the momentum. The title track was a 10-minute opus that proved the band could match progressive rock's most ambitious acts, note for note. Songs like Sunrise and Spider-Woman demonstrated their range. They could be heavy, they could be melodic, they could be both simultaneously. These weren't just albums, they were statements. Uriah Heep was proving that you didn't need critical approval to matter. You just needed to connect with the people. By 1973's Sweet Freedom, the band was at their commercial zenith. The album went gold, and tracks like Stealin' became arena anthems. They were filling stadiums, selling millions of records, and doing it all while critics continued to dismiss them as too loud, too repetitive, too predictable. The fans didn't care. They showed up by the thousands. They bought the records. They sang along. For the listeners who grew up with this music blasting from their car radios on summer nights, Uriah Heep represented possibility. The idea that working-class kids with big dreams could conquer the world. But behind the gold records and sold-out shows, something was already breaking. Success in rock and roll is a double-edged sword. It validates everything you've worked for, but it also exposes every fault line, every unresolved tension, every personal demon you've been ignoring. For Uriah Heep, the cracks appeared in the form of constant lineup changes. The revolving door of members became the band's defining characteristic, and their curse. Drummer changes became almost comical in their frequency. Keith Baker, Ian Clark, Lee Kerslake, each brought their own style, but the instability was taking its toll. Bassist Gary Thane, who joined in 1972, brought a new energy to the rhythm section, but he also brought a growing drug problem that would eventually consume him. The pressure was immense. The record label demanded new albums every 6 months. The tour schedule never stopped. 300 days a year on the road meant 300 days away from home, from family, from any semblance of normal life. David Byron, the voice that had defined the band from the beginning, started drinking more. What began as post-show celebrations turned into a daily necessity. The operatic voice that could soar above the heaviest riffs was being slowly destroyed by alcohol. Ken Hensley later admitted that the easy road they sang about in Easy Livin' never actually materialized. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Egos clashed, personal conflicts festered. The unity that had made them great was slowly disintegrating. The music industry was changing too. Punk was arriving, bringing with it a rejection of everything progressive rock represented. Critics who had always dismissed Uriah Heep now had ideological ammunition. The band that had thrived as outsiders suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of history. But they kept going, they kept recording, kept touring, kept pushing forward. Because what else could they do? This was all they knew. The collapse, when it came, was both sudden and inevitable. In 1975, bassist Gary Thane suffered a severe electric shock during a performance in Dallas. The incident, caused by faulty equipment, nearly killed him. He survived, but the physical and psychological trauma, combined with his escalating drug use, made it impossible for him to continue. He was let go by the end of the year. Then came December 1975. Gary Thane was found dead in his London apartment at the age of 27, the victim of a heroin overdose. The man who had brought such melodic power to the band's rhythm section was gone, another casualty of the rock and roll lifestyle. But the most devastating loss came in 1976, when the band made the decision that would haunt them. They fired David Byron. Byron's alcoholism had reached a point where it was affecting performances. His once commanding stage presence was erratic. His voice, damaged by years of abuse, couldn't deliver the power it once had. The band, desperate to survive, made the brutal choice. Byron never recovered. He tried solo work, but nothing matched the heights he'd reached with Uriah Heep. On February 28, 1985, David Byron died at just 38. After years of alcohol abuse had ravaged his health and career, the man who had helped create Uriah Heep, who had sung on their biggest hits, who had defined their sound, died broke and largely forgotten. The easy road had led him to an early grave. The late 70s and early 80s became a blur of lineup changes and declining commercial fortunes. Albums came and went, vocalists were hired and fired. The band that had once sold millions was now playing smaller venues to dwindling crowds. The music industry had moved on. Disco dominated the charts. New wave was the critics' darling. Hard rock was yesterday's news. Uriah Heep, once unstoppable, was now just another relic of the 70s, struggling to stay relevant in a world that had forgotten them. But here's the thing about Uriah Heep. They refused to die. In 1986, the band stabilized with the recruitment of vocalist Bernie Shaw and keyboardist Phil Lanzon. This lineup would remain largely intact for the next 3 decades, the most stable in the band's history. Then came December 1987, and something extraordinary happened. In the wake of Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost policy, Uriah Heep became the first Western hard rock band invited to perform in the Soviet Union. They played 10 consecutive nights at Moscow's Olympic Stadium to a total of 180,000 people. The atmosphere was charged with historical significance. Bernie Shaw recalled being greeted with Beatlemania levels of enthusiasm. Despite the presence of 300 armed soldiers with AK-47s surrounding the audience, the shows were a massive success. Think about that for a moment. A band that American critics had dismissed as irrelevant was making world history, helping break down the Iron Curtain one Hammond organ riff at a time. These concerts paved the way for other Western acts like Metallica and the Scorpions to enter the Russian market. The performances were recorded and released as live in Moscow, cementing the band's legacy as global rock ambassadors. But the personal losses continued. In September 2020, longtime drummer Lee Kerslake passed away after a battle with cancer. Only 2 months later, in November 2020, Ken Hensley died peacefully at his home in Spain at the age of 75. Mick Box, the last man standing, expressed deep shock at Hensley's loss, stating that his songs would remain a musical legacy that will be in people's hearts forever. Of the original members who had created the classic sound, only Mick Box remains. The legacy of Uriah Heep is complex and beautiful in its defiance of conventional wisdom. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Heep legacy is the July mourning tradition in Bulgaria. Inspired by the 1971 song of the same name, Bulgarians have gathered every year since the 1980s on the Black Sea coast to welcome the sunrise on July 1st. This tradition, known as Julia, began as a subtle act of defiance against the communist regime, with July morning serving as an anthem for freedom and new beginnings. To this day, thousands of people gather annually to sing the song as the sun rises, making it a uniquely Bulgarian celebration of liberty. A rock song written by working-class British musicians became a symbol of freedom behind the Iron Curtain. Critics could never have predicted that. As of 2024, Uriah Heep continues to tour and release a new material, led by Mick Box. His resilience is extraordinary. He has navigated 50 years of changing musical landscapes, from prog rock to disco, grunge, and the digital era, while maintaining the band's integrity. Recent albums like Living the Dream and Chaos and Color have received positive reviews, proving that the band remains a creative force rather than a mere nostalgia act. For the audience that grew up with the sounds of Easy Livin' on FM radio, Uriah Heep represents a link to a golden age of instrumental virtuosity and high-drama rock and roll. The rise and fall narrative of Uriah Heep is, in reality, a story of rise, fall, and enduring persistence. They created a body of work that survived critical derision to become a permanent fixture in the rock canon. Their 30 million records sold are a testament to a people's band that flourished precisely because they were too loud, too repetitive, and too predictable for the critics, but perfectly resonant for the fans. Uriah Heep proved that the greatest music often emerges from chaos. Lineup changes, addiction, tragedy, they endured it all. Critics dismissed them, but the fans never wavered. From London suburbs to Moscow stadiums to Bulgarian sunrises, their music transcended borders and outlasted trends. Mick Box still carries the torch, the last man standing from a brotherhood that refused to quit. What's your favorite Uriah Heep memory? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's golden era.